Hey everyone, this is Louis7, and in today's video I thought I would give you all some of my afterthoughts and a different style review of the 2019 Producer's Letter for the Lord of the Rings Online. I also do have some additional news for y'all about LOTRO in 2019 in regards to the Producer's Letter, so I'll link the letter below in the description if you want to check it out. To start off, let's go ahead and recap just what the Producer's Letter is all about. This year's Producer's Letter focused more on LOTRO's goals for the game in 2019 while still giving a roadmap for the year instead of more specific content and feature details coming throughout the year. So at this point, I should mention that I am recording some parts of this video a little bit later than I originally recorded basically this whole video because Severlin recently posted on the LOTRO forums giving some updated information regarding the Producer's Letter and just some new info for where they're headed in the future. He mainly in that talks about Minas Morgul expansion with Shelob, which Cordovan already actually clarified, but I think most importantly he touched on the legendary item system and a potential revamp coming in maybe 2020 it looks like is possible, which is why it wouldn't be in the 2019 Producer's Letter. So that's all the news from that really, so let's go ahead and continue where I left off. Remember, in the letter there are a few sections of what they are doing and working on for LOTRO in 2019. The first section we have is story, the second is on game challenge and landscape solo questing type content as well as instance and in-game. It's also got the 64-bit client section, class balance section, crafting update, more specifically for higher levels on that section, and then virtue system revamp, and they also have a section on new kinship rewards and kin buffs as well as one on some new and changed grouping features, and finally the last section is just on continued legendary server support. So in this video, instead of going through each individual thing and just rehashing all my thoughts on those, I will instead just talk about a few things I'm thinking in regards to LOTRO and as they relate to this letter, as well as just the state of the game and in-game and just some other things on my mind to give a more thorough review of the Producer's Letter than my initial kind of reaction, focusing on the positive and excitement with that video that I did a few days ago. But I will also largely be talking about what is actually not in the Producer's Letter. So if you are interested in some of my initial thoughts though, or want a recap on each thing that is in the letter, I will link that video below as well. To give a brief summary of my thoughts on the letter in general, I am excited where LOTRO is headed in 2019, excited for a lot of the changes, but as you will see in this video, I have some concerns with some of the decisions in the letter and game state in general, and the not so good parts of where LOTRO may be headed towards in the future. Alright, let's move on. Here is a good time to go ahead and introduce the recent news that has been confirmed. So it's been confirmed that Veils of Anduin is the next major update, so that would be update 24, and that Minas Morgul will be a full-blown expansion pack. I also want to point out that based on the 2018 Producer's Letter, Minas Morgul was actually intended to be update 23. I think this is just an interesting bit of info and not really a criticism, because exploring these other regions has been beneficial. I think having the later release for an expansion is a good thing, if anything, to me. So generally, I am excited for this. In my reaction, I was a bit cautious about their use of the word expansion. Honestly, I'm not initially a big fan of them just labeling what may be just major update worthy nowadays as an expansion, and just not something really worth spending money on maybe. But we'll have to see how it plays out, and it could potentially have exciting features as well. On this note, while continuing the story and unlocking new zones is exciting, LOTRO has not done well for me the past few updates towards the endgame and even questing in. The Iron Hills was actually a relatively well-made zone for any of the newer zones. It's one of my favorite zones in a long while for LOTRO. I'll just keep it at that. And Irid Mithrin had a decent middle section, but the questing turned out to not be all that fun. So endgame, since Mordor has been a bit too grindy as well, and the content just not fun to begin with for me. So with an expansion, to me, there is hope they could fix some of these issues, but if they continue the same in-game trend, it is not too exciting for me, to be honest. So we'll see how this plays out in the future with some more specific details on the Minas Morgul expansion and maybe on even Veils of Anduin. Additionally, in the letter, there is no mention of the new class announced earlier by Cordovan on one of his streams, and I want to give credit to Ath131 for reminding me of this actually and giving the source to Cordovan that a new class is coming in the future for LOTRO. So I watched that, and it sounds to me like Minas Morgul would be the perfect time to release a new class, and it seems like big enough news to me to make the letter. This is especially true with all the back-end work they've been doing with classes lately. I think it should be a relatively smooth implementation, especially compared to the Bjorning. But I thought that was odd and interesting that they had no mention of a new class at all in the letter. and to me, if it will be a feature of the expansion, it would 100% again be worth mentioning in the letter. So that's something. Will there be a new class in 2019? Maybe with Minas Morgul? I don't really know, but we can hope, and it is something I would be looking forward to with the expansion. And now somewhat related, I want to shift talking a bit about the challenge section and general just direction of LOTRO in game right now. To start off, the huge stat inflation with Mordor was particularly annoying. Standing Stone Games actually seems to be equating difficulty with stat inflation in their producer's letter, which I think is the incorrect way to interpret difficulty. To me, when I think of difficulty, I think the content itself is harder to get through. You can't just like run around blowing through everything, and you have to be a little bit careful maybe when questing to not pull a bunch of mobs, run through the middle of a really dense camp, or avoid mechanics such as knockbacks, ground effects. That's just what came to my mind. Get your interrupts in. And I think that stuff is a good thing, as long as your character still feels powerful enough that they can get through it, unlike how Mordor was, at least in my experience on a few characters there. So instead of having the content gated by gear and legendary items, how late in endgame has been the past few updates, again starting with Mordor, having an increase in actual difficulty instead of increasing in needing stats would be better to me. I will note that update 23 was a little bit better in these regards, as long as you already had your Mordor gear, or update 22 gear rather, but it still had the gating factor as far as the legendary items and even the gear a little bit goes. Say in Minas Morgul, if they want it to be scary, like they did with Mordor, they could add mechanical difficulty instead of their stat inflation difficulty, again like they had in Mordor. So that is just my thoughts on the landscape. What about in-game difficulty? Well, to me, in-game content at level 120 is just boring, to be honest. There's not much other way to put it, just boring. And it was the same way with Mordor in Update 22, and I actually found the level 105 cap pretty fun with Update 20 and Update 21. But to reiterate, I also found that content to be boring, some of the newer content with that. So setting that aside, that I enjoyed it even without enjoying the newer content, a lot of new content in LOTRO really since Helm's Deep, after they finished doing epic battles, even though I didn't like epic battles either. A lot of the new content just suffers from problems of accessibility and heavy gating. So the introduction of mythic-like tiers would actually ideally fix this. It seems like the perfect opportunity to fix this. Tier 1 to me should be something that's just straight up easy to go through, especially if you are a well-geared group, but it should still be very manageable if you are not so good quest gear like group, just very baseline type gear like that. Should be very manageable still, and even manageable if you have even worse gear. I think Tier 1 should again just be straight easy basically. An addition of tiers allows tiers up to 5 and higher to introduce more mechanical difficulty, and small increases in stuff like mob morale, defensive damage, and all that good stuff that's just general buffs that go along with tiers and etc. with that, to give people who want the increased challenge and importantly increased rewards to have their go at that. Another issue I want to touch on is not just how long content takes, but on top of that, how much longer a single tier increase is the length of the instance, and very boringly trash fights that increases that way too much to me. I think a better system for tiers would have increased tiers overall slightly longer, but that would be mitigated actually by gear upgrades you get doing the instance, so it actually takes somewhat similar time. Increased tiers can still take slightly longer, but it should not be significantly longer. I think it should even be similar time, again, after you get your gear upgrades. So basically, yeah, that's what I think it could be like instead of what it is like right now. So I think this part just comes down to implementation. SSG has to implement the system properly for it to be a good thing for the game, so let's just hope on that. Moving on to the grindiness of LOTRO and the virtue system, and no mention of either the legendary item system or even loot boxes. So the new virtue system is actually exciting because the current system just isn't good to me. The new system theoretically gives you more freedom to pick your virtues while also giving passive boosts, kind of theoretically making it less grindy, but here's the issue. LOTRO is already an extremely grindy game and tough to get into in-game, especially as a freshly leveled character. And depending on how these passive buffs work, this may just make the game even grindier. If you are basically required to do every deed to get the maximum benefit from virtues you don't even have slotted. So that is a concern I have with the virtue system revamp. Again, overall excited, but this concern is also exacerbated by other LOTRO grindiness concerns, particularly with the legendary item system. So before I get into that, just if they implement, it seems like that's going to be the case with a lot of these things, if they implement the virtue system change so that it's not extremely grindy, I think it can be a good and very exciting feature to come. But moving on to the legendary items a little bit more. The legendary item system is another extremely grindy thing, and as I mentioned earlier, having a fully upgraded legendary item is extremely vital to your character's ability to even do landscape content starting in Mordor and above. And when reading the producer's letter, I actually would have loved to scroll down and seen a section on updating the LI system and the huge gating it has to get into right now. I just really feel like there needs to be a change regarding the extreme power levels associated with having your LI full of starlit crystals versus no starlit crystals. So to highlight this issue to a specific example I have for y'all, is I applied 20 starlit crystals to my weapon on my guardian, its DPS about doubled, and with that my skill's damage about doubled. And disregarding the whole DPS guardian thing, I could suddenly do decent damage again. And the LI actually still isn't maxed out, and I can get about 1.5 times the DPS it has now for more starlit. And this is just kind of insane and feels horrible for late and in-game right now. On top of that, they have made it even more difficult to get your LI enhancement items such as starlit crystals and even scrolls a little bit. And one of the most effective ways is to actually run level 100 Minas Tirith dailies, which does not make sense from a level 120 and even just a general level 100 plus in-game perspective at all. So I would really hope they have some sort of change with the LIs in the future, and this issue highlights the, I don't really want to call it quite a pay-to-win system, but just, yeah, that they have that end game that's very much so cash grabbing and really strongly encouraging you to spend real money to make your character just normal power level at the late and end game. So on that note, there's no mention of loot box changes, which I would honestly not expect from this, but there is a part of me that would still like to see them removed from the game and a focus back on rewarding instead of extremely grindy content which you can pay to kind of skip some of the stuff that I seem to keep mentioning in this video. On the topic of legendary items, as I mentioned towards the beginning of this video, Severlin dropped some news after I recorded this, but before I edit it, so now I do have to add that they are planning on changing the LI system in some way, potentially in 2020. I think this is a good thing and can alleviate LI related issues I have talked about in this video, but for the moment, they are definitely still a concern and just a big concern for Minas Morgul expansion still. So yeah, I am adding this section at the end because it's relevant for the expansion that they may not have the update out on that by then, and it may be enough to even make the expansion not enjoyable for me. On top of that, I still feel like it was worth keeping all my ramblings about the legendary item system as they were in this video because they are still important and just that's the state of them right now. So I figured I'd go ahead and keep that and just add this little bit of info for you all at the end. So, I feel like this video has been long and negative enough already, so let's go ahead and get wrapping it up. I want to emphasize that I am still excited for where LOTRO is going in 2019, and SSG has done a lot of good recently. I just mainly have concerns with in-game and higher level content in general even, which is why you don't see me playing that stuff anymore, so yeah, I want to highlight those concerns with Minas Morgul coming out in the expansion, and hopefully some things they could fix with that. But to end on a more positive note, some things I'm really excited for include the 64-bit client. This will bring LOTRO up to the standard now, and this will allow LOTRO to use more RAM and graphics memory. One concern here, though, is I don't think just the 64-bit client alone, adds multi-threading support to LOTRO. And that would, as far as I know, again, have to be a separate feature, and having multi-threading would also greatly help LOTRO performance, especially for me. But I'm also excited for more class balance changes rather, especially the upcoming Burglar, Captain, and Roomkeeper balance and class change passes they'll be doing. I believe those are the only classes they highlighted that I have left, but to me, some others could use changes, particularly Champion. But I think they did great work in this area in 2018, and I'm excited for your future work. Although honestly, as I mentioned, I would hope they could do a little bit more changes to certain classes and specs, such as Red Line Bjorning and Back to Champion, Blue Line Champion I think could use some, and some others, but those are just examples. So I'm still excited for the crafting changes and to see specifics on those, and with my continued vested interest in the legendary servers, I am of course happy that they are continuing supports and updates to the game as the server progresses through some lower level regions. Anyway, that will be it for this, and I hope you all enjoyed my afterthoughts and review video on the producer's letter to get more focus on certain topics and better organize my opinion as well, and just some of the thinking of what is not in the producer's letter. If you did enjoy it, please consider liking and subscribing for more, and thanks for watching everyone.